is we want to have greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably down to 2%, or alternatively, if we see unexpected weakening in the labor market, or some combination of those two. And when we see that, and the data really show that, and that's reflected in our confidence and our understanding, then it'll be time for us to move. And we won't worry. Of course, it wouldn't be great if you were moving up and down quite a bit. That wouldn't be ideal.
Some of your predecessors used to speak in what I call Fed speak, which is to say incomprehensible to the average person. You try to actually explain things. Is that because you're not an economist, or you just like to explain things better because you actually sort of explain what you're likely to do at the Fed, and then you actually explain afterwards? Does that upset a lot of people at the Fed? Did you actually try to put it in English?
No, I don't think so. No, as you know, I enjoy communicating with people, and I didn't have a career as an academic economist. I'm not a trained economist, so I don't speak like one. And that seems to, I do hear a lot from, for example, people on Capitol Hill that they really appreciate that they can understand what I'm saying.
So today, the ECB lowered their interest rates recently. So why do you think the ECB lowered interest rates before the Federal Reserve? Their economy is weaker than ours, or what? Yeah,
so they're different. There are differences if you look around the world, and the big difference between the United States and many other nations is just that our economy has been so much stronger. Europe went through, the European Union went through significant Eurozone, a significant period of very, very low growth, while we were growing, 3% plus last year. So we're in a different place. And actually, what's more remarkable about the current situation is how much there is in common between what happened. Inflation broke out everywhere. Central banks did kind of very similar things. There's little differences in timing in terms of starting to loosen policy, but really the era, I think, will be known much more for its commonalities than it is for its differences like this.
So when the FOMC makes a decision, let's say to increase rates or lower rates, they finish their final meeting, you were authorized then to go out and explain what it is. How long before after the meeting ends before you go out and publicly explain it? Is it 20 minutes or so?
It's 3 or 4 hours usually.
3 or 4 hours?
Yes, because the meeting might end at, I'm out at 2:30 p.m. That's when the press conference starts at 2:30. So usually the meeting's over by 11.
And you don't worry that things will leak out in that interim period of time, I assume?
No, I don't.
Okay.
People will know better than that, I think. And
so in some parts of the society these days, people are making decisions based on something called artificial intelligence, AI. Have you thought about, calling up ChatGPT and saying, here's all the data we have. What do you think about would be a good idea? Have you ever thought about that, or they're not going to likely do that?
We haven't done that. I mean, we have done little things like we've asked ChatGPT to generate questions for the press conference. Oh. And I'm happy to report for any journalists who are here that the questions were not as good as the ones we get from real journalists. So,
what about my questions? How do they compare to my questions? Okay.
No comment.
Right, so they weren't that great. Okay. So today, at the Federal Reserve Board, you are not involved in picking anybody who's on the Federal Reserve Board. The president makes those decisions. Do they ever call you for advice on who you might pick or they might pick?
It has happened, but it's, I would say, not the norm now.
Okay.
The Reserve Bank presidents are different. We play a role with the search committees from the Reserve Banks on that.
So every summer there's a meeting of the Federal Reserve people out in Jackson Hole. What do you all do out there? I mean, I always wonder, you wear cowboy boots, you go on ride horses. What do you all do? Why do you need to go to Jackson Hole? Why not go to, someplace closer than to Washington, D.C., Baltimore-like?
Cowboy boots are worn by some, but not all. I don't wear them myself. But it's what it is. It's an academic conference. So the Kansas City Fed, which puts this on, they'll pick a topic, and then they'll find really top economists to write papers about that topic or more than one topic. You come to Jackson Hole, they present their paper, people critique it, they praise it, and that kind of thing, and that's the mornings. And in the afternoon, people go take a hike, and let me be clear, this is not a rate hike, it's an actual physical hike.
But you usually make a speech out there, I think,
yes.
Every year.
Traditionally, not every, I've done this every year, but not every Fed chair has done it every year, but I give the opening speech, and it doesn't have to have anything to do with the topic of the conference. I just give a speech. And
is it carefully worked on by the staff? You make sure you say something that sounds interesting, but you don't make any news?
No, actually, so I try to do, typically what I do is I talk about it's really focused on the economic outlook and that kind of thing at any given point in time. At Jackson Hole, I've tried to take a step back or move to a higher level and try to say things that have a little more generality to them and see what can we learn, for example.
Now, the Federal Reserve is over 100 years old. It was created under Woodrow Wilson. If you were around then, what would you have suggested they do better than they did in creating the system? Or do you think the system works pretty well after 100 years and you wouldn't change it very much?
So I'm giving myself perfect hindsight here. I would do what Congress did in 1933. So the original Fed didn't have an FOMC, and it really didn't function very well during the early parts of the Depression or during other. So in 1933, the current structure was put in place, and that's with the FOMC, with the number of governors and the voting arrangements. And I think that arrangement is fine. It works really well. In the 70s, the dual mandate was added, but ultimately, we're not looking for any law change. We think we have the authorities that we need. We think that the law is in just a fine place.
Okay. So basically, you think the system works reasonably well.
I do.
As it is today. And today, what is the biggest economic challenge you think facing the country? Is it growth? Is it inflation? Hard landing potentially? Or what are you most worried about? What keeps you up at night, if anything, in the economy?
So I'll say in the short term, that's what keeps me up at night. Literally, the thing I'm thinking about in the middle of the night is always this balance we have between not wanting to, if we ease too early, we can undermine the progress on inflation. And if we wait too late, we can undermine economic activity. We can undermine the expansion. And, so we want to get this right. And getting it right is incredibly important for the people we serve. So that is really, that's what I spend a lot of my, thinking time on. Longer term, there are lots of things to worry about. But that's really what keeps me up.
Most people, they have dinner with friends sometimes. How can you have dinner with friends without hinting at what you're thinking about? And do you ever get suggestions from your friends at dinner, this is what you should do? And how do you respond when they kind of say, maybe you should lower interest rates? You just keep eating or what?
You might define the word friend to mean doesn't ask you about interest rates. So, no, people don't do that generally. People I don't know will always say, hey, cut rates. Somebody said that in the elevator this morning.
Did that influence you or no?
I said, thank you, sir. And no, but I mean, people say things, but it's fine.
Okay, so today, for somebody that would like to be the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board in the future, is it a job you would recommend to your best friend or your best enemy?
I think it's a great job. I think, again, the last thing Chairman Bernanke said to me as he was that day, I went to see him that day, his last day at the Fed, he said, you learn so much at the Fed. Remember, Ben Bernanke was a top 5 monetary monetary economist in the world when he arrived at the Fed. So he learned a lot at the Fed. So can you imagine how much I've learned, starting? So it's never felt like work. It's so interesting all the time. And also, the dedication of the people who work there, 90, and the staff, these are people who have chosen a life of not being in the public spotlight. They just want to do their work and serve the public, and they're very dedicated. It's a wonderful place, and I would recommend the job.
So the Fed is also responsible for the way the Fed is set up. You're worried about a stable currency, I assume, and stable one not currency. You're worried about I guess
stable prices,
inflation.
Yeah,
and you're worried about unemployment, but you have you don't make any decisions about what the impact is going to be on the currency or the dollar. In other words, the impact of what you decide to do on the dollar is not something you're mandated to worry about. Is that right?
That's right. The administration has that portfolio, the management of the dollar, for what that is. It used to be something different than what it is now. But for us, the effects of the things that we do or don't do on the dollar are just another financial variable, like equity prices or things like that.
But if you worry about inflation, as you obviously are, what about the debt the United States has? We have $35 trillion of outstanding in government indebtedness, and we're adding about 1.6 to $2 trillion more or less every year. Aren't you worried about that on the impact of the economy on inflation?
So I am very worried over time about the deficits that we're running. It's not the Fed's job. We don't give Congress advice, but let me just say that we're on an unsustainable path. That doesn't mean that the level of debt we have is unsustainable. It's not. But the path we're on, where we're running, large deficits at a time of full employment and healthy growth, is not a sustainable one over time. And we really need to get to work on that. I would hope this is a top-line issue for elected people whose job it is not our job. And I believe that I do talk to quite a few elected officials in Congress, and I think there is a rising sense that it's time to do something about that. And it will take bipartisan action to address.
Let me ask you, dealing with Congress, you testify, I think at least twice a year before members of Congress. You do the House side and the Senate side. Have you ever suggested them having a joint committee so you don't have to say the same thing twice, or they don't like that?
This is in the law. It's twice in February and twice in July, so it's 4 times a year. This is the Humphrey Hawkins put that in, and it's a tradition. And so the Senate went first last week. The House went first in this March. So they alternate. I think it would take I don't know what it would take.
You get a lot of questions from members that you think are really adding a lot of good advice to you, or?
I think the members ask excellent questions. Yes, thank you for asking. They do. I'm generally very much pleased.
But you spend a fair amount of time with members of Congress compared to some of your predecessors. Is that because you think that they add a lot of value, or you just think it's a good courtesy to do that?
I think it's part of our job. In our system of government, it is the legislature that has oversight over the Fed. It's not the executive branch. In a parliamentary system, they're sort of one and the same. So it's the two committees, and so I spend a great deal of time up on the Hill talking to people in both political parties, House and Senate, just finding out what's on their mind, and really trying to take on board their thoughts on the economy and on what we're doing. And I think they appreciate that. And I think that to me is really a big part of this job.
The Fed depends on data, but how good is the Fed data collection efforts? In other words, are you using the same data collection methods you used 20, 30 years ago, or because of technology, you have better data collection methods than before? And are you convinced you have data that's as good as the private sector has?
Most of the data that we get is the same that everybody else gets. The unemployment data, the inflation data, not collected by the Fed. We do some data collection, and we've actually been, dabbling in big data efforts for more than a decade. So I think we're very focused on the quality of data and collecting different kinds of economic data. During the pandemic, of course, it became necessary to do all kinds of find all sorts of different sorts of data to reflect what was going on in the economy. We did a lot of that too.
So when you became the chair of the Fed, what was the best advice somebody gave you who was a previous chair of the Fed?
What comes to mind, I can't think of one thing. I thought that what Chairman Greenspan said was get a set of earmuffs.
And when you eventually are not the chair of the Fed and if somebody succeeds you, what would be the advice you would give them about how to be a good chair of the Fed?
To me, I think it's a very special American institution, and it's one that works to serve all Americans. And absolutely critical to that is staying in our lane, sticking to our knitting, not running to reach out to the big hot political issues of the day. And I think that's critical, because once you do that, if that's going to be what you do, what's the case for your independence? Congress has given us these powers. They've left us alone to do it, and really we need to do those things and resist the temptation to expand that mandate. That's what I probably will say to my successor.
Okay. Now, when you want to go out to, let's have a dinner in a restaurant, do you worry that people are listening to what you're saying, they're eavesdropping, or you don't say anything that anybody has to make you worry about?
So that is exactly what I worry about. I have found that I get recognized now, and people at the next table are always listening. So we don't really go to restaurants.
So what do? You just go in a private room, or you don't go to restaurants?
If you're at a restaurant, you need to be in a private room, because of course the people and by the way, if someone at your table were to be well served and start to speak loudly, everyone's hearing that too. So you got to be. We just don't do that for now. We go to we eat at home a lot. We eat at friends' houses.
Okay. Well, your wife is here. Where is she? She's right there. How long have you been married now?
39 years.
39. You had to add that up.
Do the arithmetic, yeah.
39 years. And you have how many children?
3 children.
And any grandchildren?
We have 3 grandchildren, 3 little boys, the oldest of whom is 3, and all in the same family. So this is going to be quite a little place to visit. Okay.
Well, look, we've known each other a long time. I congratulate you on doing a great job at the Fed and avoiding the hard landing. And thanks for earlier telling me when you're going to lower interest rates. In our private meeting, I now know when interest rates are going to go down. No, actually, that's not true.
You said you wouldn't tell anyone.
Right, okay. Of course. Jay, thanks for a great job you're doing for the country.
Thank you, David.
Thanks.